I was very late to fatherhood. I've got a 6-year-old, and it's really important to me to make sure I'm there for those key moments with my son. I make a real conscious effort to do school runs and drop-offs, and I don't excuse myself from those just because I'm the CEO of a £100 billion asset manager.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Richard Law-Deeks, who's Chief Executive Officer of LGPS Central, which, following its current expansion, is responsible for over £100 billion in pooled local authority pension fund assets. Prior to joining LGPS Central in 2024, he was CEO of the Royal Mail Pensions Trustees Limited, and prior to that held a series of financial roles, mostly within the local government sphere. Welcome, Richard. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that bio I just described talked through a little bit of your background and how you came to this role. But I'd love to go back a little in terms of what drew you into the pensions arena in the first place and the local government finance area before that.
Brilliant. I'll give you the long version because I think that's what you're asking for. So I think like most people, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. I had no grand plan. And for a time, I even toyed with the idea of becoming a nurse. Both my parents were nurses, but I made the decision not to do that. And I went to university and I did what interested me, which was humanities. So history and political science. Was pretty good at it. I left uni with a first class and a distinction in my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. And like lots of people, I decided that was enough, no PhD for me. And it was, what do I do next? And like lots of people, I went looking for a grad scheme. And it's probably not quite as bad as it is these days, but I did do a lot of them and a lot of the assessment centres looking for the right role. I think I knew I had to do something with purpose behind it. So most of them were either public sector schemes that we're looking at or things that had purpose, charities or private sector with purpose behind it. And I ended up landing on doing a finance graduate scheme. So I was a SIPFA trainee. SIPFA's the public sector accounting professional qualification, slightly by accident, slightly by intention. So one of my parents, two of my biological parents were nurses, but one worked in local government. So I knew about the industry. I knew about SIPFA. So that was a bit of a driver there. So I think at the start of my career, I had a lot of early exposure to local government. I was studying, I was doing placements in different departments, education, adult social care, schools, children's services. It was a traditional placement. You moved around and you studied at the same time. And I did one placement in the Treasury and Pensions team, and I absolutely loved it. Like most people, I kind of fell into pensions and it really stuck with me. The investment stuck with me. There was a real sense of purpose around using capital markets for good, really. It's not about just making profit to make people richer. It's about helping these really important key workers retire, librarians, social workers, and so on and so forth. So that's where I stuck. I went early into a role as a pensions officer or investment officer. But after a couple of different roles in a couple of different local government pension schemes, I realized I needed to get a more rounded set of experiences. I've been really, really lucky to always have had really great leaders and mentors who pushed me. So I made the jump from the public sector to the private sector, which not a lot of people do. And I went to a company called Marsh & McLennan Companies, which is the parent of Mercer, Marsh, Oliver Wyman and Guy Carpenter. And I looked after, it was a kind of global role. So there was a team that looked after all the different pension schemes all over the world. And my team looked after all the schemes outside the US. And that was a real eye opener because it exposed me to two things. One, running a pension fund for actuaries is an absolute nightmare. That's a joke. And two, the US model of pensions is quite different. They have fiduciaries as opposed to trustees. And it was really interesting to see all the different types of pension scheme around the world. But that really stuck to me that we have a very specific system in the UK that I think is quite good. We can always do better. We're never the top of that league table that Mercer pulled together, but I think we've got a good system in the UK. So I really enjoyed that role. It was really interesting. There were aspects to it that were beyond pensions, around corporate finance, around an M&A that I really enjoyed. Again, I had really good mentorship by people within that organization. And I got headhunted for the first time. And that was a massive, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a compliment. Someone comes looking for you. And that was the first time it happened. And it was to go over to the Royal Mail pension plan, which was quite well known at that point because Royal Mail had privatized. They'd done an absolutely huge transition from the plan to the government, basically, privatization. So the government took on the assets and the liabilities at the point of privatization, quite similar to what we're doing now, to be honest, moving legacy assets over from LGPS funds into the pool. So lots of relevant experience there to what's happening now. But I went into the team, I went in as finance and ops, leading the finance and ops team within the Royal Mail pension plan. Again, got exposed to lots of really interesting projects, but also was able to really support the two leaders in that team in terms of projects they wanted to do. And at the point when the chief exec moved on, I was able to become the interim chief exec officer, which was a huge opportunity. And the trustee put a lot of trust in me to do that. And I did such a good job, they asked me to do it permanently. And that was, again, a huge compliment, but right place, right time, and really great to have led the Royal Mail Pension Trustees, the executive team for many years. But when the right opportunity came up back in the LGPS, I kind of had to jump at it. I am, believe it or not, a local. So my dad's from Birmingham. My mum was born in the Black Country. I've still got a lot of family here. I actually lived down the road in Birmingham when the role came up. So it was perfect in terms of location. And it not always is for these pool jobs. Financial services broadly based in London and Edinburgh. So having something like this come up on my doorstep, I couldn't say no. And I also had all that history I talked about in the LGPS.
Well, that is wonderful. And there are a couple of strands I'd love to pull because definitely where we ended there, I want to talk about your philosophy around governance and your approach to public service. But just going back, so that original desire to be a nurse, I think that, and then also that draw to service and purpose. That clearly has been a hallmark of your life going through that. And it'd be great to just hear how you, but not only that, but also political science, obviously political science and being in politics, which a lot of your role is now, two completely different maybe definitions of the term. But has any of that stellar performance in political science as an undergrad helped you think more about the political environment you're in today?
I think so. I did my postgraduate degree in European integration, which, having gone through Brexit, it was quite helpful. But I think, and as an undergraduate, I again focused on nationalism and the rise of nationalism. And I think there's lots of history does repeat itself, or I think there's probably a sharper expression around that. But it has helped frame everything. And I think the other thing it's helped me with is those academic things you get taught. I've always been a big fan of statistics from a social sciences perspective. Things being statistically significant is something people, I think it can be powerful. And with history, it's all about sources and how things can be reinterpreted over time. And I'm always thinking about that. You're living the moment, you're doing it. How are people going to see this when they look back? And I think that helps from a regulatory point of view, because as the SMF1 of an FCA authorized company, you've always got to take reasonable steps. You've always got to think about, if this goes wrong, how are people going to look at it? And so you've always got to just make sure that, I don't think audit trail's the right word, but just make sure decisions are documented and where you've been challenged, that's been documented, because that's really important.
And this gets to the governance kind of core beliefs, because I think that's very interesting to take yourself out of the weeds into the kind of higher order. Why is this happening? Why are we doing this? What are the objectives of regulation? So maybe just to expand on that a little in terms of maybe what's at the forefront of your mind as you sit in this leadership role through this incredibly transformative time. Any core beliefs that you think just drive you and that keep you centered as you think about the next few years as you continue to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of governance, I really believe in simplicity and transparency. I think it's really helpful if everyone understands what their roles and accountabilities are. Life is never black and white, but I think if you can strive for that, it's really helpful. I'm a big fan of pooling because I'm a big fan of the fact that you can get the benefits of having these professional, owned by the fund asset managers, and you can get the scale, but you maintain that local connection, which I think is really important for members, actually. Having come from large national or even global corporates, you can really lose that local connection with members. I think back in the day, lots of these big corporate DB schemes used to have buses and local teams that would support members, face-to-face interactions. And I think the LGPS has still got that. It's still got local admin teams. And I think that's really important. So I think that's a real positive about pooling and the model. I'm a big fan of independent trustees or advisors. I think that's a bit different to professional trustees, but I'm a big fan of having someone in funds who is independent. That for me is a real positive for the future because I think it has clarified things. What's the role of the fund? What's the role of the pool? They might not be perfect, but it is helpful to have that clarity. We've retained that local accountability. I think merging funds or even we've merged pools, but merging funds, I don't think it would be good for that local connection that we're retaining. Now everyone's going to have this independent person on their pensions committee, which I think will be beneficial for governance. I think resourcing is really important in governance as well. I think it's really important you have the right people with the right capabilities and capacity. And I think, again, Fit for the Future is going to bring along senior LGPS officers, which I think will be really, really good. And I think the other thing they'll bring on the back of that is the idea of these independent reviews. And I've heard of bodies like SAB talking about peer reviews as well. And I think that will be really helpful for funds to have a safe space to talk about the challenges of resourcing that governance. So yeah, lots of good things for the future, lots of things that align with mine and thinking about governance. I've talked about FCA authorization already. I think that is a really powerful thing, having come from investment teams who are outside of that and coming into this role and being the SMF1, which is the senior manager who's accountable for control within the organization. I think it really keeps you honest. It raises the bar. There's lots of things that really, they're administratively burdensome, but I think they really just make sure that compliance and ethics is where it needs to be in the organization and also the culture.
Really interesting perspectives on governance and very refreshing, actually, because a lot of these new roles are putting a lot of burden of changes on the administering authorities as well, given they have to put in place these roles, their governance has to change, and they're also coping with some of the responsibilities changing. I suppose from your perspective, with this new governance layer, that obviously opens the pools up to very robust challenge, as it should. How do you think do you have to change anything in terms of, because their organization already existed, in order to be more responsive and open to that challenge?
Yeah, I do think you have to change things. I think there's multiple levels to this. I think there's, from a regulatory perspective, we're going to become an enhanced firm in terms of FCA authorization. That's not going to apply to all pools, but any pool over 100 billion that will apply to. And that adds requirements around operational resilience. And this is something, when it hit the banks in the UK, it took them years to implement. And I think it's going to be a big change for the pools, the bigger pools, as is increases the requirements around that senior manager certification that I talked about earlier, the SMF1. There's more of those senior manager roles. So that's the regulatory bit. But I think more importantly, there's examples out there with OCIOs and fiduciary managers in terms of how the industry can evolve to support our partner funds in holding us to account. There's already fiduciary oversight providers out there. There's already independent advisors, or I think they're calling it independent person in the guidance. There's already people out there who've got experience of this fiduciary setup and can provide the support to funds to hold us to account. The other change in governance, I guess, is one thing we had to do between as part of Fit for the Future and before we got our new sort of legal documents, shareholder documents and fiduciary management agreements signed, is we reviewed our governance. So we've almost gone back to a blank sheet of paper and looked at our governance. I think the things that are important to me, and I was touching on this in terms of what's important to me for governance, is that kind of clarity and separation of roles. And I think it's really important that partner funds understand their role as a shareholder and how they hold the company to account and help and support the company in terms of its strategy, capital, risk management, and then how they look at things or the lens they have as a client. And that's all about performance. Are they delivering their objectives as a fund? That is the investment return where it should be for their asset allocation, all those sort of good things. So there's governance both from a company regulatory point of view and from the pool, as in the company and all of our partner funds together. I think the other big change, I guess, is cultural. We are going from, when I arrived, it was just under 30 billion in assets under management to over 100 billion. That's a big change culturally. It's a change in terms of how you think as an asset. Well, we're an asset manager, but a group of asset owners, scaling at that level, it's a fundamentally different operating model. The example that I hear quoted internally quite a bit is, where we've got a fund, let's take, for example, our residential property fund. It's not about adding a few new managers or strategies to that fund. You need to think differently. You go out now and you buy a home builder, right? So it's just a different way of looking at things. And I think, we've just got to keep building that culture and keeping the kind of things that have made us successful up to this point, trying to retain that sense of purpose, the connection to the LGPS that we have. but also evolving those things that won't scale. We're looking very carefully at performance and how we create a performance culture. And probably the most important thing of all of this is kind of maintaining trust with our partner funds, delivering, for the new funds that have joined us, what we said we would. And for our existing partner funds, it's, making sure that vision that we've all agreed is maintained and the sense of purpose that we've got is there.
That's very clear, I think, from anyone who follows your LinkedIn posts and just the communication that comes from the top. And clearly, a massive time of change. But I do feel that your partner funds are on board, and it's exciting. It's scary at times, but I think there's that sense of shared purpose, which definitely comes across to an outsider. So, congratulations on achieving that. A few kind of the random bits, well, I suppose they're random, but I suppose they are important. They may have got, but they may go beneath the radar screen as this massive change occurs. But I mentioned local net zero, responsible investing. Do you still need to keep on track with all of these things as you're dealing with some of the actual structural and governance issues?
I think it's part of that scale up I've talked about. We have been lucky in that we've kept all our partner funds in a very similar place in terms of what they've wanted to do around responsible investment and stewardship. I think that it becomes more difficult with a bigger group, like you'd expect. There's more variation. There's more people in either end, the tails of views around that. I think we want to try and do that and keep people in a place where they're meeting their regulatory or legal requirements, but they're also able to express preferences, which I think is something that is pretty clear in the guidance that pools need to take into account. So that's really important. Local investing is really interesting because there's no one size fits all for this. The way that Fit for the Future kind of envisions it is this kind of tripartite relationship between the actual asset owner, which is the pension fund, the pool, which is the asset manager, and then also the combined authority or the male combined authority. So, Manchester and the West Midlands are probably the best examples of this working in practice. Across our partner funds, we've got lots of different, well, not different, but we've got people at different stages. So we've got the East Midlands County Combined Authority, which is evolving quickly. Just this week, Cheshire and Warrington have launched a combined authority. We've got two other areas that are in the priority programme. So, we're expecting to see them pretty quickly move along with English devolution. But we have lots of areas that are just focusing at the moment on local government reorganisation. So, they've got enough on their plate and they'll be thinking about devolution in due course, but they need a solution for local investing now. So that's a real challenge for us to deliver all of those things. But I think it's really exciting because I think that Fit for the Future that is going to bring that actually is going to add real value and power, because I think it's giving pools a real mandate to deliver on local investing, which in many ways can be seen as impact investing. And you've got to do it with purpose, because otherwise there's lots of these sort of investments that it's very easy just to write them off due to scale or they don't fit with a particular strategy. So having that mandate, I think, is really exciting. I think it'll have a real big impact on, the localities that we deal with. I think there's real big opportunities in things like housing, and I think it's really exciting.
And you certainly have a legend in the field, and Paddy Dowdall taking the helm there. So got great hire. So just to move now to some personal reflections. So you've had an interesting career, public, private, purpose at the helm. Would you say there were any highs and lows within that career and any particular lessons learned from any of the setbacks?
Yeah, I think there's real highs and lows in the last 12 months. It's been amazing that we got to 1st of April. We didn't take any shortcuts. I mentioned, we decided to do a governance review. We've reviewed all of our legal documentation. It was a lot of effort. And, I have to do a big shout out to all of my partner funds because, officers have got lots of other things going on and they really put in the hours to get this over the line. And also there was a lot of collaboration. There was a lot of compromise. There was a lot of coming together that was, I think, really positive. And it's one of the best things about the LGPS, that sense of community and people supporting each other. It's been hard, but it's really great that we've got here. When you're building something, that's a real positive. You don't mind putting in the hours to build something, growth. It feels amazing. I spent a lot of my career taking things apart, and that doesn't quite feel the same. I've done transactions where you're handing over assets or members or parts of your team to another organization, and that it's always been the right thing to do, but it just doesn't have the same kind of energy behind it, and the motivation's a bit different. The thing that I find hard is I was very late to fatherhood. I've got a 6-year-old, and I think it's really important to me to make sure I'm there for those kind of key moments with my son. I'm really grateful that Central is a family first organization. I think it's really important that make a real conscious effort to do school runs and drop-offs. And, I don't excuse myself from those just because I'm the CEO of a £100 billion asset manager. And I think, that can be a real high, but it can also be a low when you have to miss those things. That's something that's worth thinking about.
Now, wonderful reflections there, and particularly on the challenges that come with growth, but the kind of the energizing challenges that they are. And you already called out, you shouted out your team, which I totally expect you to do, but also leaders that you've had throughout your career that have been influential or maybe had a formative role for you. This does not have to be an exhaustive list, but any one or two names that you can mention that you learned a lot from?
There's too many. I've got to start with my parents. You picked up, they gave me that real sense of purpose. My earliest memories are being in an A&E ward at Christmas while they're both working. And, I think they worked hard. They didn't do it for the money. They did it because they cared. I've already mentioned I've got a blended family. I've got another parent who worked in local government. I'm lucky to have three parents. I think often step parents can be painted as, the wicked stepmom. And that's just not true. I'm really lucky that I've got three parents, not two. That's where I start. Mentors, again, too many to mention. Every place I've worked, even before the kind of grad jobs, I've had people who have supported me, who've taken the time to really develop me, inspire me. They've always pushed me to grow. And sometimes that means pushing you to leave the organization. And I think that's a very powerful thing. In my career, a number of times I've had people say, look, you're not going to get that from this role in this organization. You need to grow outside. And that's brave. That takes someone who's not thinking like a manager. They're thinking like a mentor, and they're thinking about how you grow and what you go on to do next. The other thing that's a bit of a game changer, or has been a game changer for me, and it really allowed me to move, to becoming a leader, was coaching. And coaching is quite different to mentoring. It's not someone in your organization. It's usually you're paying them. So there's a transactional aspect to it, but it's someone who's completely independent. They're on your side. I've come back to the same coach 3 times for what I call deep engagements that have lasted 6 months, which have really helped me deliver things or make changes to myself. And, we've stayed in touch. She knows me well. She provides things, articles. She checks in with me. She asks if I'm okay. So coaching for me is really powerful. And anyone, any future leader, I'd say, get yourself a coach. I'd be negotiating coaching over a pay rise or a bigger bonus like any day of the week. But it is worth saying that it's different. It's different to that mentorship, which is equally important. I don't want to call out any individuals in my career, but if I look at the wider world, there's a couple of people that have really inspired me. There's a guy called Herb Keller, you will have heard of because of your connections with the USA. But he was the CEO, founder of Southwest Airlines. I think he really showed that it's possible to really kind of love people, whether they're employees or customers, have fun and make money simultaneously. And I find all of that really inspiring. Slightly unsurprisingly, I'm a big fan of Nikolai Tangen, who's the CEO of Norges Bank Investment Management. He's a bit of a poster boy for asset owners, but again, he really, really focuses on culture. I think that's really something that's really powerful and really important. And I think, any good leaders worth their salt will talk about culture and how important it is.
It's really interesting that Herb Keller of Southwest, I think there's a legendary story of him out on the tarmac hauling suitcases on or off the plane because it needed to be done. No job was too big or too small. I think probably with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, which was another part of his character's persona. My last question is around any words of advice. And I think you've already been wonderfully generous with that, particularly around the coaching side of things. Anything, maybe a creed or motto or advice that you maybe would give to your younger self or can leave us with?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've touched on it already. I talked about that break when I was able to move into that interim chief exec role at Royal Mail. I kind of said right place, right time. And I often joke with people that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I think it's just try and do what you enjoy, but just get out there and expose yourself to as many different parts of an organization as you can. And if you're going to be in the right place at the right time, just be in as many places as you can. And I think that's probably my advice. And, when people ask me what younger people or future leaders in Central or in the industry, that's what I always tell them. Just get out there, just experience it, and you've got a better chance of being in the right place at the right time.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. This has been a wonderful journey throughout your career and through your thought process and just your sense of mission that you feel. I think what is so remarkable, this is a position of tremendous responsibility that all of the pool leaders find themselves in, but staying connected with the ultimate beneficiary, this is why it is being done. So I think that you demonstrated just from the very beginning, how much that beneficiary is front and center of all of your focuses. And that is so reassuring to us as we see this moment of massive change. So thank you for coming here and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you for your kind words and listening to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.